Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of our pastor, Father Martin, and on behalf of the Adult Ed Committee chaired by Bob Kilmer, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us for this year's Lenten mission. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to introduce to you our presenter for tonight and for tomorrow, Father Dennis Robinson. Father Dennis is currently the President Rector of St. Meinrad Seminary and School of Theology, where I am a proud alum. And so if I'm doing a good job as a priest, you can thank him. If I'm doing a pitiful job, well, you can stone him out back. He'll be around for a while. So I had the privilege of having Father Dennis as my President Rector since 2009. He was a priest of the Diocese of Memphis, Tennessee, before joining the Benedictine Archabbey of St. Meinrad in St. Meinrad, Indiana. He was a professor of systematic theology and has been an excellent rector for the seminary. Tonight, Father Dennis will be speaking on Lent, on the Year of Mercy, and on forgiveness and with our families and whatnot. So it is an honor for me to introduce to you someone who is not only a great priest, a great rector, a dear, dear mentor to me and to a number of seminarians from St. Meinrad, but most importantly, he's a good friend. So, Father Dennis, thank you. Please join me in welcoming Father Dennis Robinson.
Is this on now? I'm technologically challenged. Thank you, my dear friend, Father Herbert. It's so good to be here with you tonight. I know his name is Shane Duvall. I know that. I am glad to be here. I will tell you, I didn't quite know how to get to this village, which is a lovely village, by the way. And you have an excellent Qdoba just down the road here. But I brought with me a native of this place, Tony Cecil. There, he's standing in the back. Do you know Tony? You should know him. Lord have mercy. He is a seminarian from your parish and is taking all donations. I'm happy to be here. I will say, two things I noticed immediately. I haven't seen this much rock since I watched that marathon of the Flintstones on the TBS one weekend. Lots of rock. But lovely, Lord. And lots of people. Also, Father Shane said, come and speak to the youth group. Would that be the three of you? That's you. That's you. And your grandparents. That's basically that. Well, I am very happy to be with you, and it is wonderful to be here. This is what Pope Francis has called for us the Year of Mercy. You know that. Everyone knows that. I had the great honor of being in Rome around the first of the year, and everything there is about the Year of Mercy, so everything is wonderful. They're doing a terrific job with all of that. And so, obviously we're going to spend a little time during the course of these 2 evenings that we have together, hopefully. After tonight, you may say, please keep him out of this county. Discussing the issue of mercy, the question of mercy, the value of mercy, and what mercy really means for us. And I'm going to take a perspective like this. I'm going to talk this evening about one aspect of mercy. And I hope that I'm clear enough at the end of it to be able, that you'll know what I mean by it. And then tomorrow night, I'm going to reverse it and take a completely different perspective. So we'll have two different perspectives, one tonight and one tomorrow night. As you heard from Father Shane, I am a theologian by training. And generally what that means, if you don't know all about systematic theology, generally what that means is I teach the stuff that people fall asleep to. So if you feel in the course of this evening, and 2 hours, is that what we're doing? 3? 2 hours and 45 minutes. I know better than that, let me tell you. It's a Catholic group, for goodness sake. In the course of the time we have this evening, if you want to put your head down or if you want to lay down in that pew, if you start snoring a little bit, don't you even worry about it, because I see that every day in the classroom. All right. So tonight what I want to do is I want to take one aspect of mercy and talk about that. And in order to do that, I want to spend a little bit of time just in the beginning reflecting upon the gospel, what I call the gospel of mercy, and that is the gospel of St. Luke. St. Luke, sometimes referred to as the gospel of mercy. In this year of St. Luke, also we have the year of mercy. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about mercy in that context, because then I want to look at a particular passage from St. Luke's gospel that we're very familiar with, all of us know, but maybe we don't know it quite the way I'm going to do it tonight, because I'm going to do it a little twisted, you know. St. Luke, let me start by just saying, did anybody bring their Bible this evening? Does anyone have a Bible? Anyone ever heard of the Bible? Don't show me that screen. Don't show me. I'm going to tell you this story. This is a little story. I am an old Baptist. I grew up in a Baptist family. I have 6 uncles who are Baptist ministers. Most of them are dead now, you know. 6 uncles who are Baptist ministers. My grandfather was a Baptist minister. Some people say I'm a Baptist minister. This book is called the Bible. Not the Bible, the Bible. And you have to point it like this when you talk. Now, did anybody at all bring their Bible tonight? Just on your phone, you got it. Yeah, don't pull that thing up right now. Lord have mercy. This is a funny story, because we were coming in tonight and I thought, oh my goodness, I've left my phone somewhere. I couldn't find it, wasn't in any pocket, and I couldn't find it. And then I said to Tony, I said, you're going to have to go back to that Qdoba and get my phone. And then I felt my back pocket, and it was in my back pocket. I do not know why. That was a completely free story. It has nothing to do with what I'm talking about tonight. But this is called the Bible. And, you know, they say that Baptists know where everything is in the Bible. And Catholics know where the Bible is in their house. Usually propping up the leg of a table or something, you know. It's like, but this is the Bible. And if you come tomorrow night, which you probably won't after tonight, I can assure you, bring your, or your rosary. I don't really care. It doesn't matter. But this is the Bible. And I want to say just a few words about the Gospel of Luke before I launch into this little discussion about mercy. The Gospel of Luke, how many Gospels are there? Some of you are a little hesitant on that. You know, there are 4 Gospels, and the Gospel of Luke is by far one of the most, I don't say interesting, because all of the Gospels, of course, are interesting, but one of the most intriguing of the Gospels from a strictly literary point of view. Strictly literary point of view. It was written by someone who was not of the Jewish faith. St. Luke, which, by the way, is really the only gospel writer that we really know the name of. We say the other gospels are written by these people, and it certainly is in that tradition, but they never say their name. St. Luke gives us his name. He's also the author of what other book of the Bible? Thank you. It's Old Baptist up here in the front row. You know how I know they're Old Baptist? Because they're sitting in the front row. Catholics always sit in the back. Get out quicker. St. Luke, one of the 4 gospel writers, also writes the book, The Acts of the Apostles, and that's very important. I also do this whole long retreat, which I just did in Muncie, Indiana, on the Acts of the Apostles. St. Luke is an interesting writer because he's writing like a literature person and not just like a person that's going to tell the story of Jesus. He's telling the story in a very interesting and dramatic way. So, for example, St. Luke has a very important emphasis which he places on characters in the story. Who's doing what is their name, how they're related to other people. St. Luke is drawing interesting images, and some of the most famous images in Scripture come from St. Luke's Gospel. The Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, Martha and Mary, the road to Emmaus. All of these, including, of course, the biblical account of the nativity of Jesus, the birth of Jesus. So you have Jesus, you have the shepherds, you have the inn, you have the stable, you have the whole thing. St. Luke does all of this in a very, very, very important way, in a very, very, very particular way. And I want to do that, I want to say that because hopefully that little bit of insight is going to give us some ideas about what the first story that I want to talk about tonight is about. The Gospel of Luke, for example, let me tell you, two things are basically happening in the Gospel of St. Luke. The first one is St. Luke is considering what is going to happen to the Jewish people of his time. And St. Luke believes in his writing that Judaism is on a downhill trajectory. He really thinks that things are going downhill for Judaism. Because remember, St. Luke was a companion of St. Paul, but he was not Jewish. St. Luke was a Greek. And so he is going to write from the perspective of the Greeks. You know, we are very accustomed in our way of thinking that Christianity pulls itself from Judaism. And in fact, we know that it does historically. Certainly Jesus was Jewish, the apostles were Jewish, but in point of fact, by the time we get to about the year 70, when the Gospel of Luke is written, only about 8 or 9 or 10% of all Christians in the world at that time were Jewish. The rest were Greeks. And so Luke is writing his gospel for this huge crowd of Greeks. And where did these Greeks come from? They came from St. Paul. St. Paul was the one responsible for gathering all of these Greeks, former practitioners of Greek religion, now into the fold of the church. That's an important thing for us to remember, because the one thing when we look at St. Luke's gospel is St. Luke thinks that the Jews are going out, but the Greeks are coming up. And he doesn't really know anything about Judaism. In fact, when he talks about Jewish things in the gospel and in Acts of the Apostles, he usually gets it wrong. And that's fine, because neither did the people that he was writing the gospel for know about or really care about Judaism. But they did care about something else. And this is a very important idea, that one that we kind of lose sight of, because all we can think about is the development of Judaism into the early church. And that is that he's writing from the standpoint of Greeks. So, some examples of that. St. Luke is going to have a much more positive idea about the role of women in the early church than the other gospel writers, because the Greeks had a generally more positive picture of women in the church. St. Luke, unlike the other gospel writers, has Jesus. Let's do a little quiz. This quiz. I like a little pop quiz. Take out your paper. No, you don't need one. When St. Luke, when the disciples of Jesus, that's what he's doing. He gets the disciples, they go to Jerusalem, right? When the disciples of Jesus get to Jerusalem, how many are there? Now we'll ask the youth group because they know. How many disciples of Jesus are there? I can stand here all night long. Anyone just guess? Well, we know what? We know how many? We know at least how many? Right, including Judas, right? And how many others? What? Is that what you're going with? Tell me your reasoning. Okay, God bless you. Yeah, that's a little bit later, but how many with Jesus? So we have 12, and who else? Mary Magdalene, right? Mary, some other girls, right? Maybe Simon's mother-in-law, who knows? Can't go anywhere without your mother-in-law. For the Jewish gospel writers, Mark, Matthew, and John, there are about maybe 16 people that travel with Jesus. In St. Luke's gospel, there are almost, in the gospel period, 100. So Jesus is walking with this huge crowd of 100 people, because we know in chapter 9 that St. Luke has Jesus pick up 70 Gentiles to walk with him. So he has a group of about 100, and most of them are Gentiles. Most of them are Greeks who are not Jewish at all. And what is going to happen in St. Luke's gospel, which is very carefully constructed, and I could spend an entire year telling you how well constructed St. Luke's gospel is, but just take it from me. What happens is Jesus picks up these 70 Gentiles. He has the 12. He has these few other hangers on. And from chapter 9, verse 51, which is at the very center of the gospel, until chapter 19, he is leading them on a path to go to Jerusalem. So 9:51 says, Jesus turns his face to go towards Jerusalem. And in chapter 19, verse 45, he arrives in Jerusalem. So for 10 chapters, Luke is going to have Jesus and these 100 or so people walking to Jerusalem, and he's going to tell them stories. He's going to show them things. And here is where we have all of those wonderful stories that are very particular to St. Luke's gospel in this 10-chapter section. So he begins telling these stories, and what some authors have said, and I agree with them, so it must be right because I agree, is that this section is what is sometimes referred to as the catechism of discipleship. The catechism of discipleship. In other words, Jesus is going to take those 100 people, and in those 10 chapters, he's going to teach them what it means to be his follower. And that is exactly what he's going to do with us as well in those 10 chapters. Now, what I want to do this evening is I want to look at the very first story in the Catechism of Discipleship, which is found in chapter 10, beginning at verse 25. What we have here is one of the most famous stories in all of the Gospels. It's only found in St. Luke's Gospel, and it has a very, very particular meaning, which I hope I can draw out. Also, it presents, in the very first story, the important theme which St. Luke is going to develop, and that is the theme of mercy. Okay, so let's look. So I'm going to read it, okay? So this is chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. Now, behold, a lawyer, that is a scholar of the Jewish law, stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now, this is a test. Jesus is being put to the test. Why is he being put to the test? Because Jesus, at this point in the gospel, is involved in something wrong. He's doing something wrong. And that is, he's walking along, eating with, traveling with a bunch of Greeks, Gentiles, non-Jews. And so this scholar of the law is going to remind him in a very subtle way, you need to tell these Gentiles, these unclean people, to get away from you, or you're going to risk becoming unclean yourself. Now remember, St. Luke is a critic of Judaism. And so he is going to find this way for Jesus to make his point, and he is going to make his point. And Jesus said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? So he's turning the question back on this lawyer. And he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said this to him, you have answered right. Do this and you will live. Okay, no problem here. The scholar of the law knows the law. This is the Deuteronomic Code. That's your word for the evening. Deuteronomic Code. You go home, you call your friends and say, we learned all about the Deuteronomic Code tonight. And they'll say, I'm sorry, but you can get medicine for that. So yes, the lawyer obviously knows the right answer. Why? He's a lawyer. Lawyers always know the right answer. But the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now this is the question, right? That the lawyer, the scholar of the law, the Jewish fellow wants to ask Jesus. Because the answer to that question is, for him, only other Jews are your neighbor, right? In other words, get rid of these Gentiles because I'm getting a little sick in here, right? So in other words, these Jewish people are your neighbors, the few that are here, the 12 and the ladies. These Gentiles, these Greeks, are not your neighbors. He's putting Jesus in his place. Jesus said, and Jesus is going to tell a story. See, always beware of people that tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story later on. Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest, not a Catholic priest, a Jewish priest, was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place, saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these do you think proved neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? So in other words, he's asking the scholar of the law, who is the neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? So we've shown you a Jewish priest and a Jewish Levite. That's like the permanent deacons. But it was not them that showed mercy. It was the Samaritan. Now, I'll talk about that in just a minute. And he said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Now, this story is familiar. We know it. We've heard about good Samaritans, all of our lives. They're the people that do good all the time. They're always doing good, Pains in the... Right. But what is in this story? That's the first thing. What does Jesus mean by mercy? And 3, why is this story the first story in the catechism of discipleship? So, for example, if you remember from back in the day, because some of you were back in the day, some of you remember back in the days of the Baltimore Catechism. Does anybody remember that old Baltimore Catechism? Yes, I remember it. So what was the first question in the Baltimore Catechism? Was it, what is a plenary indulgence? No, what was it? Who made you? Who is God? What's God all about? Who is? In other words, you start a catechism with the most fundamental question, right? And if this is a catechism of discipleship, then obviously the answer to this question is going to be the most fundamental question, the most important thing. So if you want to know what's most important about discipleship, look to this question. But what is there? Well, we know the story, right? We've heard sermons, homilies preached about the Good Samaritan, forever. And how do they go? We know how they go because they're always pretty much the same. Not here, of course, at St. James, where everything is perfect and wonderful. But in other pathetic parishes, in other places, for years and years, people have been hearing the same exact sermon about the Good Samaritan for years. And let me tell you how it goes. Where's the pulpit? Oh, there it is. I am not from Indiana. Oh, this is on too. I am not from Indiana originally. I'm a Southerner. Aren't you glad to hear that? I come from the Diocese of Memphis, as you heard. And in the Diocese of Memphis, we have this thing called Monsignors. They don't have them everywhere, only in special places. But we have these old Monsignors, and they were the old variety, And if you've never seen one, except in captivity, they had these cassocks, right? And they're purple, right? And they're big fat men. And then they have this sash that goes up about right here. And in Memphis, they talk like this. And they tell you this and that, And they preach, but not very long, because they're Monsignors, and they don't have to preach long. So we had this Monsignor Clunan, and he was legendary. He was the pastor, now get this, are you ready? He was the pastor of the parish where he was for 50 years. 50 long years. Now, Monsignor knew how to make money, and that was probably why it was there for 50 years. Monsignors always know how to make the money, right? So they know how to make the money. So this is Monsignor, and every year he'd give the same sermon on the Good Samaritan, right? And this is how it goes. Now, you've heard it before because this is what most people hear. They hear this. Today, we have a very famous Good Samaritan passage from the Gospel of St. Luke. And what is the moral of the story, I'm asking you? I want you to think about that. You got this poor man in a ditch. He's a Jew in a ditch is what he is. And you got this priest that goes by and won't help him out, right? And you got this Levite that goes by that won't help him out. And you got this Samaritan that goes by, helps him out. Who are you in the story? Are you the priest or the Levite? Or you could be the Good Samaritan. Help your brother out. Be the Good Samaritan. Help your brother out. We won't have bingo here on Tuesday. Next Wednesday, we're having a fish fry. Yeah. So the story, and it's true, don't we? It becomes about a story about being nice to people. So the most important thing you need to know is be nice to people, right? Right? Yeah, I'm sure it's a good thing to be nice to people. Oh, yes. Yes, Lord. Do you do that with your phone, Father Duvall? Is it this showing me it's halftime? I'll have a bottle of Skin So Soft, and only the ladies got that one. You know, is it a story about being nice to people? Is that the most important thing? We have Good Samaritan laws, and all of that. Well, I suppose that's an important thing, but is that the most important thing? We have this kind of understanding that this is a story about just good behavior, being mannerly. But no. There's something much, much, much deeper here. And its presence as the first lesson in Jesus' long catechism of discipleship also tells us it also might be the most important lesson that you need to learn in the gospel. And it's not about being nice. Being nice is very important, but there's something even more important than that. So what I want to do now is just kind of take the story apart a little bit. I want to show you what's there. And sometimes there are pieces of that we overlook. So remember, St. Luke is writing the gospel for a non-Jewish audience. He wants to show them another model of being a Christian aside from that Jewish model. So he begins by telling us a very interesting detail. And for Luke, because he's such a careful writer, the detail is everything. It tells us exactly what we need to know. So we have to look at the detail. A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, that's an important point. Why? Because St. Luke could have really said there was a man going down a road, right? And probably made a point with it, right? Okay. But he says, no, a man was going from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And that's what we get in the Greek text that we do not get in the English text. He was going down to Jericho. Now, the thing you need to know is what everybody hearing this in Luke's time knew, in the ancient world knew, and that was a bad road. It was a road in which people frequently were hurt, or people were frequently robbed or killed. In other words, it was a dangerous place to be by yourself, right? So he was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, the image I like to say is, in our common, what is the big city around here? Well, I guess this is the big city. No. Lebanon Junction is the big city. Is that right, Tony? Lebanon Junction? Louisville? No, Louisville's not even really a big city, is it? It's kind of it's like 18 small towns, just crammed together. Is there a place in Louisville where you would feel like you were in danger if you went there? Oh, yes. I'll talk to you later. Yeah, so you're going down to like the worst part of Louisville at midnight, right? And before you go down there, you go to the ATM machine and you get out all your money in ones. And you tape it to your body. And then you walk down at midnight, the middle of that West End, What's going to happen to you? Bad things. Stay in Elizabethtown. No, and this is exactly the image that St. Luke is trying to paint. This man is doing something then that is really, really stupid. And what the original hearers of this text would hear, when they just heard that little bit, Jerusalem to Jericho, they would think, he's going to end up robbed. And what happens to him in the next sentence? He's robbed. And you're like, I told you so. Why? Why was he robbed? Because he was dumb. He was a dumb Jew in a ditch. I'm with Monsignor. I'm going to call him Jew in ditch. I'm going to call him Jid, just for short. Jew in ditch, right? So Jid, plural in Hebrew, Jidim, doesn't matter. Jid ends up in a ditch. And you're like, I told you he's going to end up in a ditch. I told you he shouldn't have done that. I told you don't go to that ATM. I told you don't go to Louisville. Now, I wonder what it was like for Jid in that ditch. He's laying there. He's robbed. They took all of his money. Beat up pretty bad. No wallet, no ID, nothing. Jew in ditch. And he's thinking to himself, I don't know if anybody's going to be able to help me here. I don't know if anybody even came by. If anybody even comes by, will I be able to let them know there's something wrong? So he's laying there in the ditch. Now, if I was telling this story when I was 20 years younger, I'd get down there on the floor. But, I just can't get up anymore. The arthritis is killing me. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm easily distracted, as you see. So here he is in the ditch. And, he's laying there. So maybe laying there, and he hears something. He hears something up on the road. And it's a number of folks up on the road. They're traveling in packs. That's important. And who is it? He kind of turns over a little bit in that ditch. He looks up. He tries to focus his eyes, and he sees it's a priest. Now, his reaction would have probably been the same as ours. Oh, crap. It's probably his day off. He's headed to the golf course. Turned the cell phone off. And he doesn't help. So you know what Jid did at that point? He just rolls over because there's nothing to do. The next thing, so he's waiting there, He's been there a while. Flies are starting to collect around his mouth, I try to paint a very vivid image. And around his eyes, which are all swole up, And he can't move. His sides broke, got a few ribs broken, Can't grunt a little, kind of hungry now because it's been a while. He hears some more clippity-clop up on that ditch bank, right? And he sees another group of folks go by, and in this party is a Levite, permanent deacon. Right? And you know what Jid thought at that moment? He thought, crap, I'm just going to roll over. He said, that's no better than the priest, Lord have mercy. Can't get the deacon to come and visit you either. Now, here's the thing. We often read, we think, the priest and the Levite were mean. Mean as snakes. But they weren't. What is the key? And this is why it's important that the man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, because these folks are going in the opposite direction. They're going from Jericho to Jerusalem. And they were going, the priest and the Levite, to Jerusalem. For there, every priest, every Levite had to go to Jerusalem twice a year to do 1 week service in the temple. So, in other words, they were going to do their service in the temple, this priest and Levite. And the most important thing, because they only went twice a year, was that they could not become ritually impure in the journey. And if they had gone into the ditch, tried to help the man, they would have been covered in blood, and they would have become ritually impure, which would have prevented them from doing their duty in the temple. So St. Luke's point, which we miss, we just think, they're just mean SO friends. They're just mean. They're not mean. The key to understanding it is their religion prohibited them from showing the man mercy. The law of Israel prohibits. So remember, Jesus is talking to a lawyer. And he says to the lawyer, the law prohibits this man from being helped. It's not about morals. It's not about kindness. It's the very law that governs Israel prohibits the priest and the Levite from helping the man. But then, so here he is, Jid. And he's been there for 6 or 7 hours at this point, and he is crusty. He is dirty, He's like, I can't go to the bathroom. I'll just, pss, You know how it is. And what happens? He's laying there in the ditch. He can't see. He knows that in a matter of hours, he's going to be dead. And he hears another rustling up there, and he's thinking more priests, more Levites, I don't know who it is. And he hears that rustling, and he looks finally with just this one little crease in his eye. He looks up on that bank of the ditch and sees that a Samaritan is stepping into the ditch. And do you know what his response to that was? It was, oh my God, don't let that filthy thing touch me. Literally, I'd rather die in this ditch than have that filthy thing. Because the Jews and the Samaritans, they're separate. They don't get along. The Jews believe that the Samaritans are sinners. They're Gentiles. The Jews believe that the Samaritans are filthy, dirty people. And the last thing that Jew wants is for that Samaritan to come and help him. But who was it that helps? It is the Gentile. That's Luke's point. It is the Samaritan. It is the one that man in the ditch hated more than anything in the world. And that's the one that helps him. Not only helps him though, right? He does more. He picks him up. He bandages him. He pours wine and oil into his wounds. He puts him on his donkey. He brings him to an inn. Tells the innkeeper, take care of him. I'll be back. Right? He was the one who showed him mercy, and not the one that the man would have expected. This is all very interesting, I'm sure. Well, I know it is. But what does it mean? If we're thinking about this in the context of St. Luke's Catechism of Discipleship, we're thinking about it in the context, right, of the most important lesson that you need to learn. And here's what I think that lesson is. I know it. I think it. I know it. Has anybody ever seen The Middle? I love that show, I'm just like Brick. I just talk to myself. In St. Luke's Gospel, it's not incidental. The inn, Hotel 6, appears only 3 times, right? What in chapter 2 at the beginning, remember what happens in the inn? They don't get in. They don't get in. The inn rejects Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus who's on the way. And so Jesus has to be born in a stable, right? In this central scene, there is an inn, right? And the inn is the place where the Samaritan takes the man who was in the ditch. And he says to the innkeeper, so that they take him in, right? He says to the innkeeper, you take care of him. When I come back through here, I'll give you some money. The inn is very important. That one inn rejects, the other one accepts. Remember what St. Luke is talking about. He's talking about the fall of the Jewish people. The inn of Judaism rejected Jesus, even in the womb. And this inn takes in the man who was in the ditch. It's tempting for us to ask ourselves the important question, who am I in this story? It's tempting. And it's a question that we ought to ask. And it may be that sometimes we are like the priest or the Levite, you know. And sometimes, pat yourselves on the back now, you are like the Good Samaritan. Isn't that wonderful? That just makes my heart warm thinking about it. But I will tell you this, and I think this is St. Luke's point. There is one character in this story that we always identify with. We are supposed to identify with. And that is Jid. Why? Because, like the Jew in the ditch, we are basically pretty stupid. I'm the first. What does that mean? That means we know what God wants, but we have so much trouble doing it. You know, we know what is the right thing to do, but somehow we just always choose the other thing. You know, what does St. Paul say? Remember, St. Luke is a follower of St. Paul. I do the thing I do not wish to do, and I do not do the thing that I wish to do. In other words, it's like we can't help but be stupid. And how many people haven't found themselves there? Especially, I will say, the males in the group. And the women are like, I've said it for years. Men are dumb. It's true. Men in general are about 10 points stupider than women. And believe me, they take advantage of that little advantage. We are all like the Jew in the ditch. We all do stupid things. We all make the wrong decisions. And really, isn't that the story since the apple core hit the bushes? You know? I mean, think about your own life. Think about back. Let's go back. All through history, we've had this reality of people not able to do the good thing that they know they ought to be doing. And so they walk along a road that they ought not to be walking along. They're traveling a road with their money taped to them. They get into the ditch. We are stuck in the ditch of life. You know, life is that ditch. We're beaten up by life. We're hurt by life. We're wounded by life. There we are in that ditch. All of us. We're all the man in the ditch. And you know, and here's St. Luke's point. The law and the priesthood of the old temple will not save you. But there was one who was despised and rejected by everyone. There was a Samaritan that everyone thought was the scum of the earth. There was a Samaritan that, guess what they did to him? They nailed him to a cross. And the Samaritan was called Jesus. And he came down into the ditch of life. And he picked you up. And he bound your wounds. And he took you to an inn. Guess what it is? It's a big old rocky building. And he says to the innkeepers, take care of these poor, degenerate old Jews, because I'm coming back one day, and I will repay you, fathers. Listen, I will repay you for what you have done and for what you haven't done. That's the story that Jesus wants to put at the head of our understanding. It is the story of one despised and rejected by all who had the courage to step down from heaven into the ditch of life and pick us up. Why? Because of God's mercy. We did not deserve it. It was not something that we earned. We are basically dumb. But God loves us with the infinite love of a father, a parent who looks at the child knowing that they're going to do something crazy and stupid and says, I love you just the same. Just the same. Mercy is the heart of the gospel, but it is not our mercy. It is God's mercy for us. Now I have a little story to tell you. Let me see what time it is, because I try to stay on my time. Oh Lord, I have a few minutes. If those bells start ringing, I'm out of here. I want to tell you a little story about my parents. Okay? And I'll start just by introducing them. My father, his name was Thomas. He was one of 16 children, Baptist children. He had 6 brothers who were preachers. His father was a preacher. My father was 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed about 92 pounds. And because, I think, of his background with the family, he never opened his mouth. He was the quietest man you could imagine. I mean, that's a lot of big quiet right there, you know. Thomas was a silent man. He was a peaceful man. He was a gracious man, a polite man, a man of solid prayer. He was a good man. And the thing that made him a truly, truly good man was the fact that he put up for many years with my mother. Lord have mercy. 6'10", 5 feet, 3 inches tall. Baptist woman, though, so that meant she had another foot of hair. And she was a fireball. Everything had to be talked about. I started doing this and doing this. And my father, because of his quiet, his reticence, drove her crazy. And so we always knew when she was getting a little out of control that hair would start twitching. We called it the Tower of Power. And when it started twitching, you watch out. You get out of the way. And he would always do the same thing. He would pat her on the head, which he could do. Is like down here, you know. And he would say, my mother's name is Margaret. Margaret, honey. That's the way he talks, see, because he was like from Bardstown. Margaret, honey, calm down. Well, in my mother's mind, and that's going in a very strange place, my father was just the most eccentric person in the world. He had these eccentricities. And one of his eccentricities was collecting things. Now, this is true of all men in general, right? You know, men are great collectors of things. They have these collections, you know. And but, you know, the thing about men, and the women know this, especially if you're married to them, is that the man has to collect things that are absolutely worthless in other people's eyes. You know, so it's junk, right? But they don't think it's junk. They think it's great. My father had these great collections through the years. His first was soda pop bottles. So he would collect these soda pop bottles, antique soda pop bottles. He'd collect them. He got them in trash cans and flea markets and everywhere. Pick them up off the side of the road, soda pop bottles. He'd wash them, right, and polish them with a diaper. Remember cloth diapers, you know, very good for polishing. And he put them on these shelves which he had all over the house. So we had like hundreds of these bottles everywhere. And he had this little card file which he'd put all the information about each bottle on it. And he had this Dymo label maker. You know that thing? Remember those things? You try to go, Everything labeled. Well, it drove my mother crazy because these bottles were everywhere. And so finally she had enough. And you know, when she had enough, the tears would start twitching and going. And she would say things like this. She said this all the time, all the time. Thomas, you're going to have to get rid of these bottles. Because if you don't, I will divorce you. The threat always hung in the air. And my father would just go, honey, calm down. You never know. That's what she said. They might be worth something someday. See, because men can justify any eccentricity with the promise of future financial gain. Right, boys? Well, he passed over the bottles, and the next thing he collected was hammerheads. Not the hammer part, just the metal hammer heads. And so they had like little flat ones and little pointed ones, and 1 claw and 2 claw, 3 claws. And he bought them, he polished them, he put them on these felt-covered boards all over the house. Hammerheads, hammerheads, hammerheads everywhere. And he labeled them. Until she had enough. And then, Thomas, if you don't get rid of these hammerheads, I will divorce you. Margaret, honey, calm down. You never know. They might be worth something someday. Insulator caps came next. You know, insulator caps. Yeah, you have some, don't you, at home? You know, the thing that used to be on the telephone poles, right? They're glass caps. And they were in this tall and short and white and green and blue and red caps. And if they had the little rubber seal inside, they were even more valuable. And so he collected these caps. He put these caps, all caps up, and he put them on the boards. He would label them, you know. This all he did was that thing. Caps. You know what she's going to do, right? Thomas, listen. If you don't get rid of these insulator caps, I will have to divorce you. Margaret, honey, calm down. You never know. They might be worth something someday. He also collected animate objects, pets. If there was a 3-legged dog in the neighborhood, a cat with 2 tails, a turtle with 2 heads, and of course, people. He collected people, all kinds of people. But his favorite kind of person to collect was a hitchhiker. Now remember this back in the 60s, right? You know, you had to pick up a hitchhiker without taking your life into your own hands. You're not supposed to do that today. Don't do it. So we would go every year on our vacation from where we lived in Maryland to visit my grandmother in Mississippi. It was a 14-hour drive, as long as you didn't take one of my father's shortcuts, which could prolong the trip up to 3 days. Now, the rule of thumb for men traveling in the 1960s was, we're going to Grandma's house, and we're not going to stop at all. Because, you know, they had those cars back then that had like 90-gallon gas tanks. You didn't have to stop. So you had to be ready when you went on the trip. And so I would always be ready for the trip because I'm the only child. You probably got that already. I'm the only child. I'm in the back seat all by myself. It's great. It's wonderful. So you bring your pillow and your blanket. You bring your coloring books and your colors because you forget from year to year that you really can't color in a moving car because of little games, you know, snacks in little bags, little snacks, little drinks, little Cokes in tiny little bottles and a little cooler. And of course, you have to bring your mason jar, right? You know. There will be no stopping, see? You got it, right? Don't make me get graphic with you here. So you're on your way. You have your snacks, your games, your pillow, your blanket, your jar. You're ready to go. Oh, I'm running out of time. So we're on our way, right? We get about 50 miles down the road, right? And there I could see him. 2 miles away, I could see him. The hitchhiker. So I tried to distract my father. Father, Daddy, look at that cow over there. It only has 3 legs. Look at that cow over there on the side of the road. Look, there's a hammerhead on the side of the road. It never worked. He'd see that hitchhiker and he'd hone in on me, like pull over. And the car is pulling over in this cloud of dust. So the hitchhiker walks across in front. My father rolls down the window. You had to roll in those days, And he would always say the same thing, and he always called them the same thing. He said, "Buddy, where are you going?" Never ask a hitchhiker where he's going, because his answer will always be the same. "Where are you going?" "We're going to Grandma's house in Mississippi." "Well, so am I." Then my father said the 4 dirtiest words in the English language: "Get in the back." There he was. Daddy called him Buddy, but I called him Stinky, because he was. And the first thing he'd do when he'd get in that back, he'd start looking around at my stuff, and he'd start looking at my jar. And I'd be going, "Do not share your jar. You need that jar because your mother told you never hang anything out the window." Wait for it, wait for it. And off we go. 13 and a half hours in the car with Stinky. Now I'm looking into the front seat. And over the top of the seat, I could see the top of my mother's hair. And it's twitching. Now, my mother is a Southern lady. And she would never say anything that was wrong, right? But I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking, at that moment, she was thinking, "Thomas, if you don't get rid of this stinky hitchhiker, I'm going to divorce you." And he never had the opportunity, but I know what he would have said if he had had the opportunity. He would have said, "Calm down, honey. You never know. He might be worth something someday." God, let's go back to that. God has the eye of a junk collector. You know why? Because he looks down into the ditch of life and he looks at you and you and you and you, and guess what? Me. And you know what? We see junk. But he sees glory. And that is mercy. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Get out.
The very first time I stepped into his office, I saw a bunch of junk. And it makes sense.
It's treasure.
It's treasure to him. Father Dennis, thank you. We look forward to part 2 tomorrow, a different spin or twist on things, on mercy and on Lent and whatnot. So thank you for being here. A reminder of the Adult Ed Committee, as well as various Bible studies and groups. We've provided Lenten refreshments in the Rodney Thomas room, so please continue on the good sense of humor and the good energy and the excitement. Any questions, we can take it down to the Rodney Thomas room following. A reminder, tomorrow, 6:30 with Mass. So we'll have Mass as normal. Father Dennis, during the homily, will give an hour-long homily. No, it won't be an hour long. It won't be an hour. And then we'll conclude with adoration, and we'll have the opportunity for the sacrament of reconciliation to follow. So again, thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoyed something. The many things that Father Dennis says, as you can imagine, I was with him for close to 5 years, and so there were a lot of prayer, a lot of seriousness, but we had a lot of laughs. A lot of laughs, and it certainly made seminary fly by. So Father Dennis, thank you again for being here with us. Please join us next door in the Rodney Thomas room under Bachelor Hall. God bless you all. Thank you.